So welcome all to the day 2 of 12th Business IT Conclave of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry. This session we have themed is startup stories, and we have two iconic speakers, Mr. Alok Bansal, co-founder and group CFO PolicyBazaar.com, and Mr. Vijay Menon, executive director TIE Global, in conversation with our own Mr. Arnab Basu, chairperson IT committee and advisory leader of PwC. With this, I would request Mr. Basu to please take the session forward.
Thank you, Angana. Um, Good evening, viewers, and it's indeed a pleasure and a privilege to have Alok and Vijay both on the call. This session is a bit different from some of the other sessions we were having. We wanted to have discussion on startups, and who better than to talk about a startup, somebody who has done it himself and somebody who has taken it to a unicorn. And of course, Vijay would also, been an entrepreneur himself. He has also been very deeply involved with TIE, and through TIE helped many startups see the light of day through their guidance. And of course, he brings in the global perspective. So we thought a bit of the Indian versus the global perspective would probably make it interesting for all of you. And again, I don't think that sitting today, we need to really say why we are having this topic. Just in the last year, I think India added more than 1,600 startups, roughly a rate of 4 a day. And I think the only way ahead for us is to grow, and to reach wider markets that have a very fast digital adoption. We have been having a very strong unicorn club, and this year itself, we have had quite a few of them. And I think the country now finds itself, I would say, sort of in the epicenter of entrepreneurship. And in 2021 alone, the Indian startups have so far raised a lot of money, more than 20 billion in funding, achieved unicorn statuses. Many of them have gone for IPOs, and many other things have happened. So I think without trying to give any more background, I'll probably just go to our speakers. So Alok, welcome to the show, and I think this is indeed a great opportunity for us to hear from you, and I would say learn a bit from your experience. And as I said, that we would try and keep it as conversational, and would try and also say that maybe we are all looking for a bit of tips from somebody who has done it already. For the viewers, Alok and I go back quite a long time. We were in IMCAL, batchmates and also hostel mates, quite a few moons back. But Alok, again, welcome once more. One of the things which we always keep hearing, about startups, and really the startups who see the light of the day, is it always about the idea? And how unique is the idea, how unique is the idea that it has never been thought of by anybody else? Or is it more around execution in terms of how do you make the idea see the light of the day? For many of us who are uninformed, to us as startup in today's day only means the app, right? But there's a huge amount of thing which goes behind what we see either on the app or on the portal or wherever. So what your thoughts around whether it's the idea is more important or the execution?
A great question, Arnab, and thanks very much for having me here. When we look at a startup, as a founder, there has to be a clear motivation of why do you want to do a startup. Is it about money? Is it about the fame? Because right now when you look at the media reports, sometimes they can sound almost making heroes out of people who are trying to build something without really realizing that what is the extent of that particular business. And valuation itself sometimes can drive a lot of those discussions. But what is the real motivating factor? And are you there to solve a real customer problem? And do you have the passion to solve for that? So when you say idea, what is idea? Idea is you have recognized that there's some gap that the market offers, and you would want to fill up that gap with some solution. Now, whether it's app or website, that's just one of the ways. It can even be a physical business, it can be a factory, it can be anything, right? But you have to figure out what is the gap and is it meaningful enough for you to attempt spending next 3, 5, 10 years of your life trying to fill up that gap in a meaningfully different way. That's also very important because if you are a copycat of anyone else, then it's very, very tough. But idea is sort of the genesis of why do you want to start. But even if you are trying to become another Flipkart or another whoever, eventually it's about execution. So delta comes from the execution. A lot of people start off in a similar sort of domain, but not everyone reaches the same end game, right? So don't lose visibility of the end game. So end game should be very clear. Where do you want to reach and why do you want to reach there? But break it down into milestones and keep on executing. All sort of stuff will happen in between. So it's all about execution, all about flexibility, all about how to keep the team motivated. Yes, idea is something which will sort of get you started, but nothing beyond that, to be honest. Thinking of idea, and just because someone has the idea, will get them only so far, nothing more. It's actually just about execution.
Nice. And that's very interesting, Alok, because, most of us would normally think that, if you don't get an idea, we are not being able to build because we don't have the right idea. But as you're saying that you might have an idea, but there would be many others with similar kind of ideas. And I think the ones who execute well would probably, shine on.
I'll give you an example. Right
Sure.
now, there are news about space travel and space tourism, right? Now, it's an idea which a lot of people can think of. And even if someone else has thought of, you can even try to do the same stuff yourself. But the real differentiator will come from the way you want to execute it, right? So, most of the places you will find that there will be pockets of opportunities within the same domain, efficiencies where you can do a lot of stuff, even if you're a very, very dominant player. But eventually, you will have to have the grit to see the execution through. Idea is just a romantic way of looking at startups, nothing more, if you ask me honestly.
No, absolutely. And you touched upon a very important point, grit, and we'll come back to the grit and take a few learnings from you in terms of your experience. But let me just move to Vijay once. Vijay, sitting in the US, sitting in the Valley, you keep hearing about the startup ecosystem in India, many of them going unicorn or reaching the unicorn stage, many of them trying to go and raise capital. What's the relevance of Indian startups on the global stage? What's the view from the Valley?
I think, Arnab, thanks for having me on this panel, and good morning or good evening to all of you. It's very early in the morning here in California. I think the view from the Valley clearly is that the Indian startup ecosystem is finally coming of age, especially for the investors from a standpoint of exits. I think the Zomato IPO was, in a sense, a watershed moment where investors have been putting money into India for many, many years now, and many of them have not had a chance to exit and take some of that money out. And in that sense, what happened with Zomato is a watershed moment, and there's a huge amount of optimism right now across the world, especially in the Valley. And given all the US-China difficulties that are there, I think it's a great window of opportunity for India and Indian startups. So clearly see that. Having said that, if you look at the Indian GDP as a part of the global GDP, it's probably 3%. So if you miss out on markets like the US, which is almost 25% of the global GDP, or if you take Europe and add it to that, another 22%, you could potentially miss out on about close to 50% of the global market. So I think for many startups which have global ideas, it's imperative that they look beyond India. And the good news is that because you build products for India, you're frugal, you build it typically in a language like English, so can be taken across the world. So there are lots of advantages of building in India. And of course, India has great tech. So the tech startups, that comes very, very naturally. You can see that with the amount of techies and all the big firms out here. So I think the image of India is very, very positive. Exits was one of the issues that was there. And I think people are now seeing a path towards exit. We just saw BillDesk, I think, got acquired, Zomato. So these are all, and I think Paytm is going for an IPO. So great green shoots, and a great story coming out of it.
Nice, and you're very correct that of course, for it can be a watershed moment, and I think it's important for investors to get a taste of getting their money back for them to push more money into the newer startups, and I'm sure that it would fuel that flow of money back as well. Um, you also mentioned another important point, which is around the access to the wider market or the access to the global markets for Indian startups. So look, I'll probably come to you, and we know what Policy Bazaar has achieved over the last several years. But when you look at a startup, and when you look at their need to scale up, when you look at their need to expand into new markets, I think very clearly there's that question that, okay, to spend or not to spend, right? In terms of access to wider markets, could be unknown markets, whether we should go into it or not. And very close to that is, again, coming back to the point which Vijay mentioned, when should the startups try and raise money? Because obviously both are interrelated in terms of your need to spend versus when to raise money and how to sort of go about it. Your thoughts, learnings on this, Alok?
Sure, Anup. See, the sad part is there's no single answer. Each startup is different in its own unique way. It's built by the personality of the founders and the environment and the industry it works in. So for some domains, it may be okay to delay the funding and do the POC first, but there will be other opportunities where having that funding will give you the early traction and get you that scale where you can get a lot more participants interested, either as investors or customers or tech providers or whatever. So it will have to be the call taken by the company and the founders, looking at the reality of what they are trying to build. Typically, having capital versus not having capital is always good. So, if you have a choice, take that capital, even if it means a little bit of dilution. It gives you more confidence to experiment. It gives you some ways to handle some of the headaches which may come. Suppose on the last day you can't pay your team salary because of not getting that collections on time for whatever reasons. Founders should not spend huge amount of time on those things if possible. Now, when you look at expansion, see, for any business, there are three choices, and we all make that choice. And geographical expansion is just one of them. We can go deep into the value chain. We can go wide into adjacent products, or we can go across geographies. And again, the founder and the team has to select what is right, given the circumstances and given the industry they work in. Some of the solutions that Indian companies are building these days can be taken global quite easily, specifically something like EdTech or SaaS. But on the other hand, we have seen that the reality is Zomato acquired companies all over the world. We spent more than $500 million and nothing worked out. Right. So it depends on the industry. So no single answer there. India is a very large market. That's a good point. It's a very, very large market, huge TAM. For a lot of companies, the opportunity that exists in India itself is very big to target before they start to attempt going outside. But yeah, at the right time, it makes sense. The models that Indian companies are trying to develop, plus you mentioned a very good point about frugality, because India is a very tough value for money market. So if you are able to build a business here, there is a very high probability that in a market which pays more handsomely, your product will become a hero. So yes, it's a large opportunity outside, but I think we need to win it at home first before we try to attempt something outside.
And just to, sort of learn a bit more from your experience, when you look at your expansion plans, you obviously looked at probably, similar products, what you can do related to the core product that you have. You obviously mentioned that we have a very large market in India, especially in the area of insurance. I think Indians are very underinsured. So, of course, the overall runway for growth is very high in India. But I'm sure when you were looking at growing or scaling up your business, what made you choose? You talked about these two, three ways in which you can expand. What made you choose one over the other?
Again, I'll go back to the same earlier thesis of what is the problem we're trying to solve. Now, if we look at it specific to our situation, we were trying to work in an industry which traditionally has been focused more on distributor rather than consumer,
Hmm.
which sort of forced the industry to look at India as a single pool of risk and create a solution which was very low tech in terms of buying, in terms of claims, in terms of everything. And I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but all of us came from outside the industry in that sense. In fact, even today in Policy Bazaar, if I look at top 50 people, maybe one or two people would have worked in the insurance sector ever. So we were able to challenge the status quo and ask very stupid questions. And eventually, we realized that it's a core product within the financial planning for any customer, especially middle class.
Hmm.
So internally, we always have this thing that we want to solve for the financial risk which can come with a death, disease, or disability in a middle class family. And we are very, very focused. So when we started looking for that objective, we realized the current products and the current way of buying or current claim process or whatever you want to call it will not really help customers beyond a point. So we have to do more. When I say more, it means that we have to look at small customer segments, start to look at the product innovation, look at what all data we can capture to sort of push that product innovation. Similarly, we looked at how much tech can be involved in the whole process and sort of work with our partners to integrate that tech in the part of buying and claims as much as possible. But it's a large industry, it moves slowly, and there are so many companies, so you have to work with each one. So it takes time. Nothing happens overnight in insurance. So we have been patient. We have been around for 14 years now almost. But our first aim was to go deep. But as we were doing that, we also realized that it's an industry which has a huge regulatory overhang. And our investors came back to us saying that, you should de-risk. And so we started Tashabaja, which was a credit marketplace, aiming to do the same sort of stuff on the credit side. We also eventually started a small Dubai business. But that was also, again, as a reaction to a lot of people coming from Dubai to Policybazaar.com and trying to find a solution for them, because eventually from Middle East, most of the people come back to India, and the reality is half of Dubai is Indians anyways. So we said, okay, if they are anyways coming to .com, why don't we create a .ae, a local website there to solve for local needs? It's a young business, young experiment for us. But yes, the first attempt was to go deep. But unless you control the whole experience end to end, your brand will not have that sort of mind equity that you need from consumers' perspective. And once we went a little deep and we continued to push for it, then we started to go wide.
Very interesting, Alok. Vijay, if I can, pick up one point which Alok mentioned, that, in the overall global footprint, one of the areas where he sees Indian startups really making a mark is obviously the SaaS play, and, areas like edutech and what we are doing. And of course, we keep talking about different things, right? Whether it's health tech or an edutech or an agri-tech, there are startups of different kinds. Considering that where we are as India, do you really think that we can make a mark in edutech, or is it more to take advantage of the Indian diaspora that we would be thinking of? Because if you're looking at either healthcare or an education, there are many countries who are generally, just from the access to that, far ahead of India, right? And so, to that extent, what is your thought that which are the kind of Indian startups which would go global in the next few years?
So I think specifically to pick on what some of the areas that you talked about, ed tech and health tech, etc. It makes sense for Indian startups to, I think, look in the immediate neighborhood. So like Alok said, Dubai, Singapore, which are culturally very similar to India, might be the first point of entry for any Indian startup. The second would be to look at markets like Africa, for instance, which is again very uh, where Indian frugal innovation can really do wonders over there because they need those kind of solutions. As far as the US and developed markets like Europe are concerned, I think uh, the great opportunity is for uh, some of the more deep tech startups that are there. So people who are doing cutting edge work in AI, in blockchain, because those businesses I think go across the world. And the US, you have to come to the US if you're a SaaS company because that's a market that really pays. I've spoken to many Indian SaaS companies. They find it difficult to enough Indian customers and a critical mass in India of paying customers in India, the kind that they really want. So I think some of these areas really lend themselves to global expansion, especially SaaS, especially product companies which are into deep tech. These are companies that should come to markets like the US. Some of the others, where the market is very different culturally. For instance, the way healthcare is organized in the US is very different from how it's organized in other parts of the world. So there are entry barriers to come in here, is what I would say.
No, of course, and matured markets would obviously have those kind of entry barriers, and we shouldn't, for a moment trivialize how difficult it must be for every startup to go, and reach the scale of a unicorn or to go into a matured market and make a difference. One of the things, Alok, coming to you, I wanted to also ask is that we there's obviously going to be a fair amount of alignment across the teams which you would be recruiting. Early days of startups, people would probably be coming in for maybe they're coming in for the ESOPs, maybe they're coming in for an alignment of the vision which you said, that what exactly am I trying to solve. But when you look at that team and how you've hired, did you hire based on people who you trusted? When did you start hiring more people based on the competence, or was it the other way around? Any thoughts on how you build up that startup team? Because that's something where it's really difficult to understand who is there as a mercenary and who is there for the long haul, right? So any thoughts of that?
So, early stage, in fact, I think not only early stage, at all stages, hiring for skill is overrated compared to hiring for attitude. So, there are two, three approaches we have taken. One, can we work with this person sort of thing? You typically end up meeting half an hour to 1 hour with any particular candidate, right? It's very tough to judge it within that short time frame. So you have to go with a little bit of your gut and look at any trends in their resume and in their conversation around specific traits like how did they solve any problem, were they able to step up and take a decision and manage any situation, how flexible they were in their thinking. Uh, Trust is very tough to judge, to be honest, but again, at early stage, that can be developed if you ask me honestly, because you guys at that stage is a very, very small team and you keep on interacting with everyone so much and you spend so much time together that the right sort of leaders, trust can be easily built with the team. Uh, Competence, is important, but again, I would say except for one or two jobs like specific to say coding or accounting, practically everything else is very general management, and people can develop those skills as required if they have the right learning attitude. So I think hiring for attitude typically has worked better for us. Uh, Another thing which seems to have worked better for us is the sort of culture that we tried to develop. It's not a hierarchical culture that, okay, we have decided and we will say what needs to be done. It's almost like a college canteen culture. If those friends are sitting across the table and just deciding what is the best step, if there are 10 people in the room and I'm one of them, I also have one vote only. We just decide what is right, and once we decide, then we go after it. But decision is mutual uh, in a very democratic way most of the time. Once in a while, yes, you have to say that things have to be done in this way, but most of the time it's very democratic, and then people are part of that decision. So you get that alignment automatically, and that brings a sense of belonging. There's a difference between ESOP, which gives you a bit of ownership, and a sense of belonging where people say this is my own. And the biggest proof is that's what in our case the management attrition is negligible, and almost everyone wants to come back. And we have actually hired maybe 1/3 of the people who have left us at the management level already over the last many years. Typically, people leave if they're not able to scale up to the extent where the company requires them to scale up. But as companies grow, there will be opportunity for them to also start to contribute, and we are able to get them back. But we remain friends with everyone. So it's their own company. It's not some place that they're working. To be honest, a person who is joining us at 30 or 32 age, willing to spend next 5 to 10 years, that's their prime of the life they're giving to the company. And we have to reciprocate in terms of the respect they get, the role they get, the money they can make, and everything.
No, I will dig a bit deeper into this, because right now, if you look at the, overall employee ecosystem on the supply side, I think India is going through a major crisis. Almost every large firm is going through a huge attrition levels and all that. And, when you ask most of the people, they're saying, okay, we want to go and join startups, right? So, when they're saying we want to go and join the industry they mean is the startup industry. So you obviously mentioned that, people come in for the culture, the open culture, the democratic culture, the fact that you are treating them like, owners rather than as employees. But to what extent do you see, Alok, this trend also changing over the years, and even now this mad rush for people, which we keep hearing about, and large tech companies are losing, people by, tens of thousands in a quarter and all that, which keeps coming in the news, especially the listed companies who are, obligated to respond and let the people know. How much of it is just the pull of the ESOPs? I'm coming back to that. How much of that is what it's making people move, and how much is for the, nicer bits which you talked of around the culture, the innovation, and the, independence?
So let me take it into two parts actually. One part, the reality is large organizations end up defining the role very narrowly, and the sort of pace at which any experiment can be done get restricted because of the structure. It's starting to happen with us as well. We are now becoming liberalized with 8,000 people plus. So there is a particular way of doing things, and then you have parity, and then you have other sort of internal stuff going on all the time. But in an early stage company, typically employees have huge amount of freedom in terms of what they want to do, and hence their learning curve is very steep, and you can see the impact of what you're doing immediately. You try to make a change on the website, and next day you can see its positive or negative impact. In a large company, typically that's very tough, very tough. And
True.
traditionally, most of the service companies on the tech side have 30-35% bench strength. People are actually not doing anything; they're sitting idle. So how do you then motivate that person to actually contribute in long term? either they are preparing for MBA to be realistic, or they are looking out for a job. If they're not working, they have to do something. Now coming to the ESOP part, see, most of the young companies these days, and I'm talking about very recent phenomena of last 6 months to 1 year, have got absurd amount of funding. And since they do not have that corporate overhang of how much they can spend on any particular line item and specifically salaries and all, they can go way beyond a normal established large corporate. And the reality is most of the people want fixed salary as much as possible, including all of us on this call. If you tell someone that you will get 20% variable, 30% variable, 40% variable, they'll keep running. If you say zero variable, they'll be more happy. No, so people don't like uncertainty in their compensation. And ESOP, till it's proven it's got any value, it's still a challenge. People want ESOP, but not at the cost of sacrificing salary, to be honest. You tell them you take 10% less salary, but I'll give you 1x or 2x of your salary as ESOP. No, people don't take. Now, because there are some success stories, and media has projected those success stories, and people will end up making money, and large number of people will end up making money. So then people start to think that, okay, this is as real as money or cash. But the reality is very, very few companies will get to that stage where employees will actually make a decent money. No, it's not just that how much is the employee ESOP, it's also the company has to get to a particular scale that liquidity event can happen. Otherwise, this is all paper money. So, to be honest, most of people don't understand ESOP. They want it, but they don't really value it when they're talking to a prospective employer. Media definitely will help here as the stories will come out. There were some stories on Zomato. I'm sure once Paytm or us or anyone else list, there will be a lot more stories. And that will sort of create that excitement into the prospective employees. So yeah, I don't think ESOPs are still as understood, and Indian employees typically are anyway little risk averse from competitive perspective.
Okay. We have one thing which Alok was hinting at, and he talked about that, you don't have the corporate overhang, which some of the larger companies have. Now, when you're sitting and, you're looking at a startup from an outside in perspective, right? The entire concept of metrics for them, looking at them through the traditional balance sheet P&L lens, or is it there are some new age engagement metrics which you're looking at, trying to understand? Because see, most of what we hear is that we have these astounding valuations, and along with that, you also have massive losses which these companies are doing, at least in the short term, right? So how does this work out? Your views on that.
So if you contrast, Silicon Valley with most parts of the world, what really stands out in Silicon Valley is the ability to take risks, both from the investor as well as from a lot of young entrepreneurs, and that's really the differentiating, factor of Silicon Valley. And apparently, it comes because of the California gold rush. The people who actually moved west 200 years ago were the risk takers, right? And
so it's all in the genes. It's all in the genes. We can't do anything.
It's all in the genes. Yeah, it's all in the genes and the culture that's there, right? So there is a huge premium that's paid on what they see as some cutting edge idea. So if the investors here see something that could change the world in a sense, they are willing to pour huge amounts of money behind it, suffer huge amounts of losses because they believe that ultimately, that will pay off. And it has in the past. I mean, if you take examples of even Uber has just turned a profit. So, these are cultural changes you're trying to bring on in the way people use a particular service. So I think Silicon Valley does take those big bets. They do fail spectacularly, but they're not bothered about failure at all. In fact, a lot of the entrepreneurs here count it not by failure. They don't even call it failure. They call it as somebody who's tried, learned, and therefore tell me about your new idea is what the investor here says. right? So they're willing to look at the new idea. I also want to touch upon a little bit about what Alok talked about, in terms of employees and the freedom and what gets stifled in large companies. So some of the companies in the valley have, attempted to solve this problem in very creative ways, and I think Cisco really stands out as an example of that. They do put small teams of employees as a separate project, and they're given complete freedom and funding, and they run like a startup there. The other thing that Cisco does is, if an entrepreneur comes to them, they have something called a spin-in. So you create the company within Cisco. They give you the entire infrastructure to create it, and they'll buy you out. So these are models that are, that have really worked for companies like Cisco to retain that creativity, retain that edge which entrepreneurs bring, as opposed to in a large company where that gets lost. And I think the Indian ecosystem will start looking at some of these options, and you will see some of these creative ways of people, working in corporates too, as we go ahead. Yeah.
No, very interesting how they are driving micro innovation. Alok, one question to you before we take on some of the audience questions which have come in. And any startup you talk to, I always find it very fascinating to hear about their wrong decisions, or how they really sunk a lot of money into a wrong decision or whatever, and how you learned from it. So anything from your experience which you would like to talk to us about?
Yeah. Huge number of mistakes. I think that's part of the whole deal. The strike rate for any entrepreneur, any company will not be very different, if you ask me. People are trying to put the best effort out there. So you'll end up making mistakes. But two things which my advice to any young entrepreneur would be: one, have a very clear idea when your particular experiment is not working, and come out of it very, very quickly. And second, never bother about sunk cost, because that's happened in the past. It's not very easy, I'm telling you. The sunk cost is something everyone will have to learn, but you can't really change the past, so why to bother? But we had our share of mistakes, I would say, multiple times. At least days, we thought that at that time, although the whole industry was not ready, but we will build a sales ecosystem. And when we realized, no, at that time sales will not work, and we shut down sales and moved to a lead sort of model, lead gen model. Eventually, after a few years, we moved back to sales. But in hindsight, maybe we should not have closed down that sales part and kept on pushing it, maybe along with some lead gen, but we maybe lost few years because of that in the whole learning curve. Similarly, we tried a small experiment with offline presence, because people were already coming to us, and we thought, okay, why not we start to close these transactions using some offline presence. We didn't manage it properly, to be honest, and it didn't work out, and we stopped it. And we never relooked, because we thought it's something we never want to touch. 2 years back, we got a CEO for Policybazaar, and he challenged that thinking. And we started again about a few months back and realized it's a game changer. And now we are kicking ourselves that why didn't we think about it 7 years back or 8 years back? So multiple things will happen. You have to live with your decisions. So obviously, there will be mistakes which everyone will make, including any successful company. Same for fund age, same for the valuation at which you raise the fund. Hindsight obviously is 2020, but you take a decision based on what you know at that particular time. So yeah, it's okay.
True. Vijay, one of the questions which has come from the audience is, tapping global funds or tapping these mega funds globally. Now, how do you see that? And also your views on what's happening with these Chinese startup companies where, very clearly, there's something which is pulling funds out, or, sort of making them come to their knees, right? In some sense or the other. So just your views on these two.
Well, I don't know enough about what's happening in China, but from a very, I would say a 30,000 foot level, what I could say is probably China is going back to, in a sense, some of its communist leanings, where wealth needs to be shared, and you don't want somebody who's the capitalist ideology that you know wealth creators are treated in a different way. So I think that's probably what's happening in China, where they are trying to. And Alok probably has a different perspective, better than mine. But having said that, I think for Indian startups, this presents a great opportunity. So if you're able to, really, if you have a business that can be taken global, I think this is the best time to come out there. And what I think typically investors in the US look for is, are you uh, willing to address this market in terms of one of the founders moving here? Are you willing to incorporate in the US? And are you, willing to? And I think customer-facing roles like service and sales, you need to get local people, because I think customers here are comfortable dealing with them, and there's a cultural issue. So these are all things that organizations like TiE can really help entrepreneurs with. And there are multiple organizations like us that are incubators. There are programs of large companies like Amazon, Google, etc., acceleration programs. But we can really help you get the right kind of mentors, the right kind of investors in terms of money, access to the markets. I call them the four M's. I think mentors, markets, money, and manpower in terms of the right kind of people that you want to hire. These are all four areas where organizations like us can help you. And we are increasingly seeing startups coming here, setting up and benefiting from some of the programs that like TiE runs or other incubators run. So I think there is money. I believe there's almost $2 trillion of capital sitting in Silicon Valley waiting to go somewhere. So it's for it's for India to grab some of that. And I'm sure there are organizations like us who are pitching to India, saying that we need to change some of the regulations, which will really help. But those who want to come here, there is money for the right kind of startups, and there are organizations to help you. So I think that's the message I want to leave with young startups in India. Come, see the world, and conquer the world. We are all here with you. There's a large diaspora that's willing to support. People who have come here, succeeded. They want you to succeed and do well there. So,
right. So, Alok, last question for you, I think, and I have two parts of that question. One is, of course, the question which everybody wants to ask: what qualities do VCs look in founders? Right? Is it about the intellectual integrity or about the self-awareness? What really lures VCs in? That's one part. But I think the other question I wanted to ask was, and this is more of something I keep thinking about, that what's making Indians create more successful professionals than successful entrepreneurs at scale, right? If you look at even our batch, and how our batch is sort of panned out after 20 years of passing out from campus, you would see a lot of successful professionals. You would probably not see that many successful entrepreneurs. Of course, there would be a few like you who have gone into the orbit, and even the examples now you're taking are about space. So, but these are the two questions, qualities which VCs look for in founders, and why do you think that Indians are more towards the professional than the entrepreneur side?
See, I think the risk reward is very skewed in a startup, and a lot of us come from middle class background. Taking a safer option, and specifically, something as simple as taking a home loan early in your age will tie you down. That's the truth. So there almost no fallback option available to a lot of people if they don't make it okay in their life. And getting into a startup scenario is definitely much riskier. We only hear about some of the stories which work out well, and they may be 2%, they may be 10%, but it's a very small percentage of the total universe of people who are trying out something. So yeah, I don't know exactly how to define that, but some people are more oriented towards taking those risks by nature, and maybe they're a little bit overconfident, or Maybe they are willing to live with the consequences of it not working out. I remember early stage, I actually told my wife that if nothing works out, we'll sell our house, we'll move to Bhiwadi, which is roughly 50 kilometers away from Gurgaon, take a small place, kids can go to a local school, we'll manage. But I was willing to do that in my mind. No, if I was going to compare with the other batchmates and see what trajectory they are on, what cars they drive, or how they live in, I would never have started. Right. Second, in my case, I can tell you that it was like, okay, after 2 years or 5 years, if it doesn't work out at all, I can always go back to the job. Yes, there'll be a loss of maybe 2 years on the CV. That was the case in 2008, 2009. Now, actually, it's positive. But that's the most it can happen, right? Why not? You only have one life, why not try? But it was never about what monetary outcome it can bring. That actually never crossed our mind. It's a byproduct, to be honest. You do well, you will make money. But the aim is, are you actually doing something which is actually transforming some industry, changing someone's life? You know, that's what we are in insurance, which is very close to the impact it can create on any family. And you actually feel proud about doing that. Also, and then there are 8,000 people who are running their house because of this company now. So, you know, a lot of positives you feel good about. You know, one thing which often get overlooked is having a crazy optimistic view of life when you want to start up. You have to have that positive outlook. You know, people sometimes say you were lucky or serendipity played a big role. But the reality is you were lucky because you were looking for that luck. You know, there may be 100 rupees note lying on the road, but if you're not looking for that, you will not pick it up. Right. So, yeah, I think you have to be a little crazy maybe, you know, and agree to live with the downside.
No, that's.
I think Arnab, what Alok forgot to mention is on a lighter note, you need to have a surname Bansal.
No, I think on that lighter note, I would really thank Alok, you and Vijay yourself for taking the time out and spending the last hour with us. I think our viewers would have got really motivated by what they heard from both of you. And Alok, thanks for sharing so many parts or snippets of your life's journey as you made this and you've made it so big. All the best, you know, as you go into the IPO. We are all looking forward to it. And as Vijay said, organizations like TIE can really help upcoming entrepreneurs, you know, sort of chart out their road of success. And, you know, if they're, you know, the 4 M's he talked of, I'm sure if you are getting stuck on that, please feel free to reach out to them. With that, I would bring this session to a conclusion. We do have the startup stories continuing, but again, my personal thanks, Alok and Vijay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having us.
With pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you, Alok,
Have a good
Vijay, Arnab.
Salt Lake Sector 5, or the nerve center of Eastern India's human capital, is home to more than 900 companies with more than 100,000 professionals employed directly. This is where Infinity Group has acted as the harbinger of IT revolution over the past decades.
We started our journey as Infinity in the year 1996. As a group, we always felt that we should do business which has impact, and can we do something for state of West Bengal and create some IT infrastructure which is the state of art, ahead of its time, and looking at the customer's future requirement.
With numerous green buildings that total over 5 million square feet of green infrastructure scattered within an area of 3 kilometers.
And today, if I see the journey of Infinity from 96 to 2018, I feel very happy that Infinity has played a catalyst role, of course with the support of the government of West Bengal. And today, if I go out of the building and see the vibrant young crowd, and around 200,000 people are working now in Sector 5.
a home of smart thinkers, is a marvel called the Infinity Think Tank, which was one of the very first intelligent IT-empowered workspace in Sector 5 that revolutionized the landscape of the area and ushered in an era that raised the benchmark of infrastructure and brought in smart integrated business parks all around.
You know, we are very conscious about the environment. All our buildings are green. Our first green platinum building came 10 years back, which was second in India, 7th in the world. Infinity has taken a vow that all their buildings, whether residential, whether commercial, whether shopping mall, whatever we do, has to be green.
A slew of cutting-edge smart green buildings with a futuristic design and robust engineering followed, such as Infinity Benchmark, Godrej Waterside, Infinity IT Lagoon, Martin Byrne Business Park, Merlin Infinite, and Advance Infinity.
So looking at the requirement of today's youth, entrepreneurs, startups, SMEs, we felt that if we give them a tension-free environment, we give them a space which is plug and play, they can come anytime, they can go anytime. For the lady worker, there is a security, and provide all the support which they need.
Infinity Business Center is housed in the award-winning Benchmark and Godrej Waterside building, having state-of-the-art co-working spaces at the heart of Sector 5. Some of the most valued customers of Infinity Business Center being Nissan Motors, Mars Chocolate, Avaya, Kimberly-Clark, Pearson Education, and Renault. Fully furnished plug-and-play model, which is scalable at any point of time. Infinity Business Center will offer every single modern amenity and convenience needed by you to crack that $1 million deal.
Today, we have around 400-500 seats. We are expanding it. We will be happy to help these entrepreneurs in whatever manner, including investing with them, mentoring them, and whatever is required to be done. I wish you all the best. Thank you.